Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the college's, part of the college's Hispanic Heritage Month celebration. We're very excited today to have Dr. Eduardo Maldonado speak with us. He's a faculty member here in the college and an associate professor. He got his doctorate in veterinary medicine in Argentina. He practiced for about 15 years, is that correct?
Yep, well, 15.
And then he went back and got his PhD. He then did a short research stint in Spain before he joined Dr. John Lemaster's lab here as a postdoc. And then we were very fortunate to recruit Dr. Maldonado to the college's faculty. He is going to tell us a little bit about his perspectives and about his home country, Argentina, and why they're going to win the World Cup this year.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, that's coming in November. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you also for others that are online. This is not, I need an AKG. I need 2 microphones instead of 1. So it doesn't mean I'm recording my heart rate with all these cables. So socioeconomic perspective of healthcare in Argentina. So why talk about perspectives? Because everything depends on how we look, from what side we look. We can be basically looking at the same image, but this guy thinks it's a 6, this guy thinks it's a 9. But the thing is the same. So it depends on how you look. Now, why socioeconomic? Well, socioeconomic because in many societies there is a growing gap between those that are wealthy and those that are poor. And sometimes there is a line, and that line cannot be crossed. And cannot be crossed for several reasons: cultural reasons, economical reasons, discrimination, racial bias, and so forth. But the reality is there is a line. Of course, that line is invisible. Now, also, there are sometimes a geographical discrimination between those that have a lot and those that don't have much or barely anything. And so now I'm not walking. Right. So the reality is, when you look at the pyramid in Argentina, is what is in the base are basically what poor people are. This is from 2020, and the poor people on the bottom of the pyramid was almost 32%. Unfortunately, we are good in creating poverty in Argentina. Now we are reaching 40 or 45%, possibly by the end of this year. And that's very unfortunate. But that means the base of the pyramid is growing, and the top is just becoming smaller and smaller. So that gap is becoming bigger and bigger. Now, this is about the heritage, Hispanic heritage. Well, I have a problem with the word Hispanic, because in Spanish, Hispanic means mostly those people that speak Spanish, but not that belong to a certain group. But here in America, when you have to click what you are, you have, if you are a Hispanic or Latino, is that your option? It's not Hispanic one option, Latino other option. It's just either or in the same category. And we don't belong to the same category. We really, many of us feel that we belong to different. Actually, there was an interesting survey when they were asking people what they feel they are, how they classify themselves. How do they classify themselves as Latinos or Hispanic? And it's quite interesting because a lot of people think they are Latinos. A lot of people think they classify themselves as Hispanics. And then to make another complicating factor, then there are those that are born from Latinos families but are born in the US, so basically they are Americans. So when they check, they don't check Latino, they don't check Hispanic, they think they are, and actually they are Americans, but they perceive themselves as Americans, not Latinos, not Hispanic. So there is a little bit of confusion. So the word Latino includes all these countries that are listed here that basically goes from the Rio Grande to the south, including Mexico, but that also the Latino include Brazil. And you know, well, I don't know if you know, but when the World Cup approaches, we have a huge hatred with Brazil. So we really hate Brazilians. And Brazilians really hate us, but that's just for soccer and for the World Cup. So from November to December, we hate each other, and we really wish the worst for the other team. But after that, we are good. We are good brothers. So in the most common classification used here, the Latinos include all the population that are overlapping here, or the countries that are in the overlapping figure, and the Latinos include Brazil, but does not include Spain. Now, the Hispanic include all those countries that are overlapped, but include Spain. So there is a little bit of confusion. Semantic is not so clear. I prefer to say that I am Latino. I don't like call myself Hispanic. But there are other people that like calling themselves Hispanic, and other people just don't have many concerns about it. But just to put it into the context, because this is called the Hispanic Heritage Month. Now, where we are. So we are in South America. For those of you that are not so familiar, we are part of the world. But we are very, very low in the globe. So you had to turn the globe, and then you can see us in the southern hemisphere. Now, we are opposite in many ways. One of the ways we are opposite to America is because of the weather. So here is winter, there is summer. Here is summer, there is winter. Now we enter autumn, they enter spring. So it's the southern hemisphere below the equator, weather is different. Now, we are also a country that is very long from top to south, if you want to allow me to use that word long. And we have several regions. We have the northeast, the northwest, another region called Cuyo, the Región Pampeana, or the Pampas, as you may have heard. I'm pretty sure you have heard mostly about the Patagonia, because that's a very touristic site. Now, before we went to independence, we were part of what was called the Virreinato del Río de la Plata. There was a viceroy that was a surrogate of the Spanish king. And that was very big. So you can see here, now that I'm at the podium, I can use the mouse, yes. So there was part of Argentina was part of this called Virreinato del Río de la Plata. And that was ruled by a viceroy that was a surrogate of the Spanish king. Fortunately, that didn't last long, and we were liberated. So this is the face of our liberator, was called José de San Martín. It was a general, it was a father, he's a father of our country, and that basically he beat the Spanish army, and finally just was the one that liberated not only us, not only our country, but also Chile and Peru. Chile is on the other side of the Andes, and Peru is a little bit up north. So we have, on our road to independence, we have two major dates, or two major times to remember, because we have a revolution in May 25th, 1810. And that's where we have a declaration of freedom, but it was not a declaration of independence. So we have sort of two steps. And the second one was the Declaration of Independence in July 9th, 1986. So the May Revolution was basically a huge assembly and a lot of movements, political arrangements, and a lot of people outside. But this is in the center of Buenos Aires, which is the capital city. the place is called Cabildo. It's still, you can go and visit there. So that stay in place and has been obviously restored, but it's a very, very nice building. It's just in the very, very center of what would be Buenos Aires downtown. But the independence was declared in a province in the north called Tucumán, and in this small house that you can also go and visit, but is very up in the north, and that's when the Declaration of Independence was. So we have sort of our road to independence was a two-step process. Now, the city of Buenos Aires is located just here. It's part of the Región Pampeana, which means it just basically belongs to that region composed by five provinces actually, that is the region that is the richest region in my country in terms of agriculture and also cow production and dairy production and all that. But the city of Buenos Aires itself is a huge city. So the metropolitan area is about 15 million people. So the capital itself is 3 million, then you cross a big highway, or we call an avenida, and then you go to the metropolitan, the suburbs. But in reality, there is no geographical separation. It's just one huge street or avenida or highway, if you wish, and then on the other side it's a continuum. Now everything is integrated, and it's about 15 million people. Now this is a very well advanced city that has a lot of parks, greens, a lot of nightlife. These two places are, this particular place is called Palermo. A lot of tourists, international tourists, go there because there's nice nightlife, restaurants and shops and everything. Now, at the same time, Buenos Aires has many buildings that are really an expression of a European architecture, many of them French style, some of them are palaces. So depending on what part of the city, capital city, you are walking, is basically, if you have had the opportunity to be in Madrid, Paris, you will not notice much difference. It's a really, really European atmosphere in terms of the architecture in certain parts of Buenos Aires. We also have the Teatro Colón, the Colón Theater, which is basically is well-known, recognized, and is one of the most famous theaters all over the world. Is compared to the opera in Milan, for example. So it's a really, really nice building, a nice expression of the architecture, but also a place where there are many expressions of art are being placed there, like orchestras and ballets and so forth. Now, this is the city where I am from. So it's here, it's about 500 miles from Buenos Aires. I just have to show my city because it's my city and I'm talking. So you have to apologize for that. But basically, my city is about 300,000 people. It's in the south. It's considered the entrance of the Patagonia because the Patagonia starts about 200 kilometers, about 150 miles, 140 miles south of my town. In between my town and the capital city, you have, we call it, I'm putting the word in Spanish, llanura pampeana. We will mean sort of like a plain, but it's a plain of a very fertile soil. And that, all this area, actually is called the wet pampa, because here is when you have all kind of crops. You know, you have wheat, you have soy, you have different type of crops, and it's a real plain. It's plain. You can drive for hours and you don't see even a hill except for some particular areas. But for the most part, it's really flat. Soil is very fertile, and it's a region of high productivity in terms of agriculture, but also in terms of cows, because we are famous for our asados, you know, that come from the beef, and the beef come from the cow. So we had to get the meat from somewhere. So we are famous for that. But at the same time, unfortunately, we have this other reality. Not far away, sometimes it's 1, 2, 3, 4 miles, we have some villages of very poor people. And sometimes in the metropolitan area, if you drive 10, 15 miles or 20 miles, you go in a huge area of poverty. So you can see that the conditions of those people are absolutely different from those that they live in the wealthy areas of Buenos Aires. And what happened is, well, if you go as a tourist, and then you are taken to the touristic places, and the touristic places are nice, and then you say, wow, this is a great country, and it is a great country, and it's a country of great people. But at the same time, it's a country of huge disparities. The other region, another region is the northeast, is dry, mountainous, and is composed by all these provinces. And I took some pictures because it's really nice. I mean, actually, I have been recently there, and it's a really nice and beautiful area with plenty of nice animals. We call those llamas, and unfortunately, they eat them. It's hard if you go to the north and you want to have an asado. A cow from cows is not easy to get, but you have to llama meat. So then, knowing the llama, I just couldn't eat any of those. So I had to choose another food. So you have shops, you have regionals, but as you can see, it's a very dry. Now, if you go to the other side, to the northeast, close to Paraguay and Brazil, you see that there's a totally different game. This is the capital of one province called Chaco, and these are the famous Cataratas de Iguazu. Just for the sake of comparison, is several times bigger than the Niagara Falls, just in size. And these are very famous, and there is an Argentinian side and a Brazilian side, and of course we Argentinians say Argentinian side is nicer than the Brazilian side, and the Brazilians say, oh, Argentinian side it sucks, and then the nice one is the Brazilian one. So anyway, we can go from both sides, but both sides are really nice. But same thing or similar story. You have a lot of native people. These are native people that lives in extremely poor conditions. And you can find those kind of people in the metropolitan area. You can find those kind of people, not kind of people, they are not a kind of people, people under unfavorable circumstances. Because if you say a kind of people, it looks like it's just you think they are poor because it's a category. No, it's people living under very unfavorable circumstances, and this is a common landscape in many areas in the northeast, but also in the northwest of Argentina. And many of those people, to escape from poverty, have gone to Buenos Aires. But then when they go to Buenos Aires, they think they are going to have a better life, but they don't, in many cases, or in most cases. So then they end up in villages, and they basically reproduce the same situation that they are in their own provinces, but they become poor in a big city, which is even, sometimes it's even worse. Another region is Cuyo. So Cuyo is close to the Andes, 3 provinces. We have the Cerro Aconcagua, which is 6,959 meters, one of the tallest peaks in the world. A lot of international alpinists goes there to climb to the summit, and there are a lot of them die also because it's a dangerous thing. But also Cuyo is known for this, for the wine. So it's a major producer of wine. I'm not going to ask who drinks wine or who likes wine here, but I'm sure a lot of, okay, 1, 2, okay. I got a lot of interest with that. So we're famous for our different type of wine, and most of them are produced in this region. Now, possibly the most commonly heard area of Argentina is the Patagonia. A lot of people know about Patagonia, and sometimes I think if they think about Argentina, they don't know where Argentina is, but they know Patagonia is in Argentina. Now we have such a little bit of problem with our Chilean brothers, which are the other side of the Andes, because they have the Patagonia also. So there is a Chilean Patagonia and the Argentinian Patagonia. Our Patagonia is bigger, obviously because the Andes are here. So the Patagonia has, you have access to the Atlantic Ocean. There is a place called Puerto Madryn here in this province is Chubut. And then you can go and see in August, also it's an attraction for international tourists, you see the Ballena Franca. So it's the Franca whale, and then you can go in an excursion in a boat and people can even touch the whales. On the very, very much south of it is Ushuaia, which is a very nice, beautiful city in the province of Tierra del Fuego. And then it does very, very, very south. We have also a portion of the Antarctica that we are trying not to be a prey from other countries to take that piece of Antarctica from us. But we have also a portion of the Antarctica. Now, in the middle, in between the sea and the Andes, there is big plain of nothing. By I mean nothing that is recognizable as a living entity except vegetables. You can drive for hours and you don't see animals, you don't see anything. You see this just vegetation, dry, and that's the plain. But then you go to the other side and you have the beautiful Andes. You have some examples here. So these Andes are from here all the way, actually from the west side of Argentina, from the up north to up to the south, you have Andes. Now, how was country? Our country was formed. Our country was formed a lot because we have native people. I mean, the Europeans think they discover us, and it's a big discussion because they didn't discover anything. I mean, they didn't know native people exist in South America or in America. So they talk about the discovery of America. Well, they discovered because they didn't know, but there were native people living there. Actually, there is a big discussion now because a lot of people say, well, they didn't discover anything. There were two cultures that were encountering each other. And then when you say that to the Spanish just got some of them have a seizure because, you know, they became very annoyed. And well, it's a point of debate and discussion, but I think it's fair to say, well, the two cultures were just encountering each other. But basically, the European side of or version of the story is they discovered America. Well, depending on they did not discover, a matter of debate, but also in Argentina is a country of immigration. So many times, you know, we think we have a lot of some hidden talks here in the US about immigration. Well, a lot of countries have immigration. We had a lot of immigration. Now, immigration came in waves. So big waves came during the world wars, the first and the second. And a lot of people just were escaping from war. And Argentina at that time, in 1914 to 1918, 1949 to 41 to 45, was one of the most, the wealthiest country in the world, believe it or not. Now we're going to 50% poverty, but in those times we were the 8th economy in the world. So it was even at that time, it was more attractive for a lot of Europeans to go to Argentina compared to coming to the US or Canada. And now that's also exemplifies how dynamic things are. Now we are in the bottom, at some time we were close to the top. But then post-war immigration were mostly from neighboring countries. Neighboring countries are Paraguay, here, Bolivia, Chile, and to a less extent Uruguay, Peru, and to a less extent Brazil. But the immigration came in waves, and if you put in numbers, by far, at least, this is actually from 2019 report, most of the immigration currently in Argentina come from Paraguay and then from different countries. These things are very dynamic because I don't know what will be the real number from immigrants from Venezuela now, because we have had in the last 2-3 years a huge immigration from Venezuela. Actually, if you go to Buenos Aires now, you go to restaurants and shops and all that, you have a lot of waiters, waitresses, and clerk employees that are from Venezuela because they were escaping from the current Venezuela's regime. So all this immigration is very dynamic. Now we also did the opposite, because as Hispanic or Latinos, we just have a lot of immigration in the US. And if you go, you see this heat map about the population Hispanic or Latino, you see that most of the immigration is in California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, and Florida. And then it's just because they are closer to the border with Mexico, and most of those immigration is Mexican or Central American. If you see by different countries, half of the immigration come from Mexico and other countries. But then if you look at where we are only 303,000 people. So you don't have to worry much about Argentinians. So we are sort of non-harmful population at this moment in terms of immigration. But that's how those immigration goes back and forth, and there are flows, and there are is dynamic. So just was to present what was the case, and how was just obviously is an oversimplification, my perspective of what I want to show to you. Now, considering all that, how heterogeneous is our country in terms of the socioeconomic conditions, in terms of geography, then I wanted to talk a little bit to you about the healthcare system in Argentina. So we have a mixed system. We have a public system which is free. So in Argentina, if you don't have money, just you go to a hospital, you go to a clinic, and you get free treatment. And free treatment means free. You don't pay a coin. From a doctor consultation to a surgery, low complexity, high complexity, you can stay in hospital, and you can give birth in a hospital, and then you can have your kid treated in your hospital, your parents treated in a hospital, you don't pay a coin. Now, that has a downside, of course, which is the delay in the attention and sometimes the quality of the attention. However, a lot of the best doctors that are working in the private system, in the best private clinics, also they go and spend some time at one public hospital. So that's a characteristic of my country, that it has this free system, completely free, paid mostly by the provinces and the towns, and with very little involvement of the federal government. And it also has some problem, because people from neighboring countries, knowing that it's free, they just come from neighboring countries and get medical attention in our country. And then our country, that has about 50% of poverty, then spend resources just treating people from other countries that are not Argentinian. So people from Chile go to Mendoza, they cross the Andes. People from Paraguay goes to Misiones, cross the river, and people from Bolivia also cross the border, which is a very, very affluent border, let's call that way, and then they get free treatment. And other also is causing a lot of trouble, a lot of discussion between different political groups. Now, that covered about 30% of the population that doesn't have any kind of health coverage. Nothing, zero. And they don't have money to pay for it. Now, there is about most of the people, about 54, 55% have health insurance through their unions. So the unions in Argentina are very powerful. And many times people volunteer to join the unions, but very many times the union volunteer them to join. Let's put that way. So, but the unions have their own health care system. In many cases, they have their own hospitals, their own clinics, their own pharmacies. In many cases, are excellent. In other cases, what they do, if they don't have, they cannot do at their hospitals or clinics what the person needs, then they pay somebody else. But the co-pay, the out-of-pocket money from the people that pay and belong to a union, any kind of union, is usually very small. So it's a very convenient and efficient way. And then the private companies are around 10%, and of course the private companies represent the smallest amount on the market, and that's simply because the amount of wealthy people that can afford that is smaller and smaller. At this moment, just having a private insurance for a family is about, the whole amount per month is more than the average salary of a person. So that gives you an idea how difficult it is and why the portion is small. So if you have a private health care, this is it's called Sanatorio Otamendi, it's a private clinic. This is a Swiss Medical, a private company. You can see, if you look at the rooms, they are not very much different from here. Here you see a lot of journalists with cameras and everything, because that's where politicians go, actors go, actresses go, and wealthy people. Now people go into the public system for just they have a different reality. It doesn't mean they don't get quality treatment. It just means they don't have a nice room. Sometimes they are packed in the hallways. They have to do long waits. Sometimes they have to go at 5 a.m. just to get some appointment, and then wait and then maybe they are at 4 or 5 a.m. just making a line, and then by the time they get there to the desk, there are no more appointments for that day, so they had to come the other day. These people, sometimes in Buenos Aires, they travel 2-3 hours by bus or by train to get there to be online, and then they don't get the appointment. So it has downsides, but in the end, at least they will have free treatment. So in terms of how many physicians and nurses we have in relation to the population, you see that there are differences. Provinces in the north always are the poorest, and they have less physicians. In the Patagonia, they have less physicians. But if you see the numbers, it's around, let's say, 1, 8, 2 to 4. But if you look at Buenos Aires, it's 1663. So we have a saying in Argentina, we say that God is everywhere, but the offices are in Buenos Aires. And that's sort of true, because it's very much centralized. And this is what happened with the nurses. If you compare data from the World Health Organization, the number of physicians in Latin America as a whole is 2.3 per 1,000, I should say here. And sorry for that typo, and we're above that. And if you take the whole European Union, not country by country, the whole European Union is 338, and we are slightly above that. So in terms of the human resources, we are good. Now, since this is a College of Pharmacy, I wanted to put some data about the pharmacy industry in Argentina. And this is in Spanish, because I couldn't find anything in English, but I will give you the most important things. So where research and development is in some private companies, research, usually national research institutions and universities. So they do basic research and clinical research. So some of that go into private companies that produce basically what it was product of the research and development in Argentina. And some of them with some public manufacturing places. Then once the drugs are produced, they are sent to what they call distribution centers. But also, this word, droguerías, is when basically a distribution center of drugs. So all the drugs that are being manufactured in Argentina, most of them are just patents that were expired, not so much proper development. Then basically that manufacture go to a distribution. It's like a sort of a wholesale for drugs. And then it goes to the pharmacies, and then it's distributed through the whole system. So the pharmacy shops in Argentina, there are around 13,000 shops that belongs to pharmacy chains. That is about 60% of the market, and that's growing. So that's creating a big tension, between the traditional structure. Traditional structure was there were pharmacies that were privately owned, small pharmacies in every place. And still, if you go to a small town, you don't have this pharmacy chains. You just have small pharmacies. And that's how it was. But now they are these are more coming, arriving, let's say, just for a comparison, like CVS, Walgreens, that type of pharmacy chain. And then it's growing, and it's putting attention on all those and making causing struggle for survival. So, for example, this one pharmacy, just one of them, has 233 pharmacies, employs 6,500 pharmacists, and they have around 3 million customers per month. Just to have you an idea, we're a country of 45 million people. And these are some examples of privately owned pharmacies, which are the most common. In Buenos Aires, actually, there are a lot of those, even there are still big chains. There are a lot of small pharmacies, not small and not that small, but privately owned. But then as you go away from Buenos Aires, and especially as you go through small towns, the amount of pharmacies, sometimes the only pharmacies are the privately owned. So the true bad is, this is real. This is not, I mean, of course, a cartoon. Sort of stupid, it's a real, but it's a cartoon that represents reality, right? This line is really real. In Argentina, if you want to admit or don't want to admit, it doesn't matter. The reality is there. So people living with money lives in a certain place, people with no money live in a different place, people with money have access to a certain education, no money, different education, money, certain health care, no money, another type of health care. And this gap, this difference between the two, as we expand the base, unfortunately in Argentina, and make this smaller, particularly this that belongs to the middle class people, that is shrinking. Because the base is expanding, the middle class is shrinking, and the rich are rich. So the reality is typically wealthy people remain wealthy, and sometimes become more wealthy. The poor can become more poor, and those more poor people, that gap between 32 in 2020 to almost 45 by the end of this year, is people falling from the middle class. So people falling from the middle class, it will mean that they will put more pressure on the public system because they will lose a job. Many of those, they don't have a job, or they work in the black market, and they don't belong to a union, so they don't have health insurance through a union. Obviously, they don't have money to pay for private health, and then they have to go to the public system. So the pressure on the public system in Argentina is mounting. And it's mounting in a moment in which the governments have less money to put on the public system. So it's creating a huge tension and a health crisis, on top of all the crises that we are good in generating, because we have a certain expertise in generating crises in Argentina. We start with political and economical crisis, and then extends all over the place. And then we have educational crisis, health crisis. But don't misunderstand me. I love being Argentinian, I'm proud. But we are where we are, and we have the problems that we have. So what is the good? This is a true bad. The good is, if you have money, you go to private health care. And then you go to those suites in a clinic, you have money. Doesn't matter where you are, you have access to the best health care. Actually, the physicians in those top places are physicians that are trained, highly trained. They travel all the time to Europe, to the US, to the best meeting. They have the best treatment, the best equipment. So whatever you have here, you can have there, if you have money. Now, if you belong to a union, you are in between, but sometimes you have excellent health care. But if you don't have any money, you can have public health care for free. And I think that's a huge thing in my country, with all the defects. I think it's great. And because also we think we have in the Constitution, not so explicitly written, but basically it's a constitutional right, the right to health. And I think that's why we have this public health system, and it's strongly supported. By the way, I'm a product of the free education system. I went to the university, I became a vet without paying any money. Now, you can look at me and you say, well, look at the product, it's not that good. Well, I can admit that, or maybe even agree with you that the product is not good, but still I didn't pay, or my parents didn't pay. So I didn't have to go to work to pay, and I just went out of the vet school without a huge debt to pay, like I'm paying for my kids now, for example. No, I remember now they had to pay starting again. So finally, muchas gracias means thank you. And I had to mention this. You know, our flag, we are a soccer country. Actually, we are a football country. So we are a football country for all the world except the US. When we cross the border, we had to say soccer. But everywhere is soccer. So we have the former best player in the world, Diego Maradona, and we have the current best player in the world, Messi. So we are waiting now for somebody else to be born, and so next time or next life I can put another slide here. So thank you. And if you have any kind of questions, just please, I'm pretty much to answer if I can. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir.
No, you're welcome.
Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon for Eduardo's talk. Excellent. I learned a lot about Argentina. We would also like to remind everybody, Dr. Andy Maldonado is speaking in 2 weeks on Thursday the 13th, if I remember right, as well at noon. And we're excited about her speaking as part of the university's continued celebration. But again, thank you for joining us today. Have a great afternoon, and we'll keep you up to date on everything weather.